Today's Bible reading comes from Psalms chapter 55 through chapter 60. And our daily devotional today here at Carrollton Christian Fellowship comes from the very beginning of Psalm chapter 55. And what we see here in Psalm 55 is that this is a psalm from David to the Lord, and that David is crying out to the Lord, and that he is trusting the Lord against an enemy who is very close and very near to him. So this enemy that David is experiencing and is crying out to the Lord and is calling on the Lord's help for here is not an enemy that is far away. It's not an enemy from another kingdom or from another nation, but this is one who's very close, and so close in fact is from the same and from within the same city that David is in. And so David is writing this psalm and singing a psalm to the Lord for the Lord to rescue him, for the Lord to save him, for the Lord to carry out justice upon this individual who is going forward and is seeking to attack David, is seeking to harm David, but is also seeking to harm and to do evil and wicked within the city. And so David's psalm here in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 55, David's psalm, he recounts and he gives his misery that he is going through. And this misery is because of the oppression of the one who is opposing him. That's where all this is coming from again. And that this has infiltrated the city and where David is in. And it's infiltrated so much so, and to such an influence, that it is making the city unsafe. And we see that it's not just unsafe for him, but it's unsafe for all those in the city and all those around. And so this is a very damaging influence that is happening and that is coming in and opposing. In verses 4 through 8, we see that David is fighting against the fear of man and the unrighteousness that has been built up and has built and developed a stronghold within the city. So David's fighting against being afraid of this individual and instead in trusting the Lord. So David has this same tendency and the same temptation that we all go through, is to fear man instead of trust the Lord. But this psalm here talks about how David is going to trust the Lord instead of fear that individual who is seeking to attack and who is bringing in and tearing down the city and the place where David's at. And that what this individual is doing is that, and this stronghold, this wickedness and this evil stronghold, this grip that this individual is doing upon the city, and what it's bringing about is bringing pain upon the city, not just on David, but upon the city. It's bringing terror upon the city. And so this is something that David is being inflicted upon by, but also the city and those around. And what we can see here, and how this even influences and how this can even apply to us today within the church. We see that this individual is someone who is infiltrated within the city, has come in under the cloaks of darkness, has come in under a cloak of, I'm here for peace, I'm here for friendship, I'm here to love the king, I'm here to support the king, I'm here to do all these things. Because that's what you had to do when you came into the city. You had to be for the king, not against him. So he's come in, he's been allowed to come in, but then once he got his influence and his stronghold, he did nothing but oppose David. And he did nothing but to bring fear and to bring anxiety upon even the city. And so for us today, this can be an individual who comes into the church and says the right things, who comes into the church and speaks the flattering words that says that they are in support of the Lord, and that they are in support of the ministry and the focus of the ministry. But when it comes down to it, and when they get enough influence within the church, they do nothing but to turn the body and turn the people away from the vision and purpose that the Lord has for that church, or to turn the people away from the church altogether. And David writes and talks about what this does when an individual comes in and turns and makes the city about something else other than what God intended for that place to be about. Or that when they completely turn that city away from who the Lord is, the character of the Lord, worshiping the Lord, that it's no longer about the Lord. What they bring upon the people is that they bring pain and terror upon the people. And this is something, sadly, again, is so common even today within the church. And a common term that comes across is church hurt. So you maybe possibly have gone through something like this, have been inflicted with something like this. This is not something that's very uncommon within the church even today. But David goes on and gives some good encouragement on how to go about and handle these things and what is the truth that we need to realize. And so let's continue on as we go. And we see that what David's response is there at the ending there in verses 4 through 8 is that what David wants to do. What David wants to do is he wants to go and run away into solitude. He wants to go and run away from everything, from everyone, from all the problems, from everything that he sees. He wants to go and just hide himself. And that's all too common, our response whenever this church hurt happens. We just want to go and run away. We just want to go and seclude ourselves away from the body and away from the Lord has called us to be. Because guess what? You would not have felt a call and desire to be there for a season or for a time unless the Lord called you to be there. The only reason why we should ever move and go and attend and fellowship at another body is because the Lord desires and sends us to another body because there's something that the Lord desires to work in our lives, and then also a gifting or a tool that the Lord has equipped us with and built us up in, that now this fellowship needs this extra encouragement and equipping that you have been equipped with somewhere else in another body for another purpose. So all these giftings, all these tools, even all the visions that different fellowships have, they're all for the purpose of God's purpose. They're not for the purpose of man. They're not for the purpose for an individual to take and rule his power and his strength, but for the vision of that specific body for what God desires to do. So this individual had come against and had said, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something else. And David's response, who was the rightful king, was the one who God had ordained with a vision for the city and for the nation, had said, you know what, I just want to quit. I just want to run away. So guess what? Even if no matter where you are within your walk with the Lord, no matter what you may think is so not important, hey, guess what? It doesn't matter. That is a very common response that we all may desire at a different time. But again, David comes through and says and encourages us in what our response should be. So verses 9 through 11, we see that David asks God to judge them for what they're doing to the city. So David does not ask God to all focus on what's happening to him and what that individual's doing to him. But David looks out and sees what's happening to the city, what's happening to the people. And David's heart is primarily for the people. And so David says, hey, Lord, judge them. Look at what they're doing to your people. Look at what they're doing to your fellowship. Look at what they're doing to the body of Christ. Look at how they're taking advantage and abusing and how they are lording over and beating your sheep with a rod instead of encouraging and uplifting and building them up for the work that you have them to do. So David says, you, Lord, you judge them. You judge their actions and you count it whether or not it is righteous or not. You judge it, Lord. I'm not going to. That's not my place. That's yours, Lord. You judge it. So that's the first thing that we do. We seek the Lord and we ask the Lord to handle these problems. We trust that the Lord has all this under control and that the Lord sees this. Why? Because it's His church. And so we allow the Lord to handle His church. We don't go in and we don't start casting around and we don't try to handle what He is doing within His church, but we trust the Lord to move amongst the people and to address the situation that's going on. Next, we see in verse 12 through 14, we see that the bitterness of a friend's betrayal, David says. So this is an individual who is super close to him. This would be like, let's say, for example, within the church today. Let's apply this to today. David, we would say, is a lead pastor or is the pastor of a church, right? Because he's in that leadership role. He is in that to where the Lord has given him the vision for what and how the city is to walk, and is the chief example for how to walk before the Lord. So he is the individual that everyone looks to and says, okay, David, you be the example of how we are to walk before the Lord. And the Lord said, you know what, David, you are the one who is the chief example in this nation of how you are to walk before me. And you are to walk uprightly and justly so that others will follow. And so that is a good similarity to this here in what's going on. And so how this applies to the church, this bitterness or this betrayal from the closest of friends, this would be like an assistant pastor or associate pastor or all these other different pastor titles, someone that so much time, energy, effort, love, prayer has gone over, and then they rise up and they say, wow, you know what? Why is that individual in that position? Why? The Lord speaks to everyone. Guess what? I can do it my way. I don't think he's doing it right. I think that I need to be. I think that I need to do. I think it needs to go this way, without the Lord ever calling and confirming that this is the direction that this body of Christ decides to go and make and do. And that's the joy of the body of Christ, is that every church has a specific purpose and point and tool that God desires to use that body of believers, that fellowship, in order to impact the area around them and also all to the ends of the earth. Every church is not supposed to look the same. Every church is not supposed to operate necessarily the same, but they are supposed to follow the Lord's leading and the Lord's guidance. And so in verse 15, David asks God to handle and take vengeance upon this individual. And later we see, much later on actually, in Paul's writings to the Thessalonians there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, we see that Paul writes how the Lord handles those who are attacking the vision that God has given and the purpose that God has given and the desire that God desires for the church and also for anyone who is going forward in what the Lord desires to do, how the Lord handles it. And that is that it doesn't always happen in our timing, but it happens in the Lord's timing. And so we just wait and trust the Lord for his timing and his purposes, because they are great, they are true, and they are always in the right time. And they have a purpose that is even working out behind them that we don't see and that we don't know. So we trust the Lord to bring things to light. So I hope this can be an encouragement to you to go forward and to support what the Lord is doing, support what the body is sensing the Lord is calling them in, and supporting your pastor in what God vision the Lord has given the pastor, and then how the body is sensing that is the timing for now, or that maybe that it's something that's taxing on the body. Always be close to the Lord, always be in fellowship and in relationship with the Lord, so that we can sense and so that we can test every spirit, and so that we know when something is afoot in order to bring something that is not godly about within the fellowship or within the city. So I hope this can be an encouragement to you, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Take care. Have a blessed one.